His name was Captain Evan MacArthur. He said he was a Special Forces soldier on his final tour in Afghanistan, a widower who had lost his wife to cancer. His words, his promises, were the only thing that made my quiet, empty house feel less lonely. And I fell for it. I fell for it with my whole, broken heart. And it cost me $40,000, my pride, and what was left of my faith in the world. He thought I was just another grieving, foolish widow he could bleed dry and then discard. He had no idea I used to be a science teacher. And he certainly had no idea I was about to apply the scientific method to his lies, and turn my own humiliation into the most detailed, evidence-based, and brutally public dissection of his entire fraudulent life. This is not a story about how I was scammed. This is the story of how I unmasked the man who did it, and how, in the process, I got my dignity back. If you have ever been made to feel foolish for trusting someone, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you are about to see how a quiet, retired teacher became a hunter. Part 1. The email that finally broke me was not a demand for money. It was a single, beautiful, devastatingly fraudulent photograph. My dearest Sarah, the message read, "This is where I am. A world of dust and danger. But all I see when I close my eyes is your face. Just a little longer." The photo attached was a masterpiece of romantic propaganda. It showed Captain Evan MacArthur, my captain, my hero, standing in the golden light of a desert sunset, his handsome, rugged face etched with a noble weariness. In the background, a silhouette of a military helicopter was landing against a dramatic, mountainous landscape. It was a picture of a lonely warrior, dreaming of home. It was also the picture that had just cost me the last of my savings. I had sent the money, $40,000 in total, in a series of escalating, ever more desperate payments, for his emergency leave. He had a chance to come home early, he'd explained, a rare opportunity. But the military bureaucracy was a nightmare. There were fees, expediting charges, a security transport bond, required to get a civilian contractor, which he claimed to be, technically, out of a war zone. Each request was accompanied by a new, more heart-wrenching story of his loneliness, of his desperation to finally be with me, to start our new life together. I, a 59-year-old retired science teacher, a woman who had spent her life teaching children the importance of evidence and critical thinking, had abandoned all of it. My husband, a fellow teacher, had passed away a year before, and the silence he left behind was a physical entity, a cold presence in our small San Jose home. Evan's words, his constant loving attention, had been a fire in that cold house. I was so desperate for the warmth that I had willingly ignored the smoke. But that last photograph, it was too perfect. As a science teacher, I had a hobby, amateur astrophotography. I knew a thing or two about light, about how it behaves, about shadows. I sat at my computer for a full hour, just looking at the picture. My grief-stricken heart saw a hero. But the cold, quiet, methodical part of my brain, the part that had been dormant for months, began to stir. Something was wrong. The light on his face, that warm, golden sunset light, was coming from the left. But the shadows on the mountains behind him were long and sharp, indicating a sun that was low and to the right. The two light sources were a physical impossibility. It was a composite, a fake, a clumsy, arrogant, beautiful lie. The realization did not come as a wave of sadness. It came as a clinical, clarifying, and utterly terrifying shock. It was the feeling of looking at a perfect cell under a microscope, and suddenly seeing the single, malignant anomaly that reveals the presence of a deadly cancer. The entire thing, the man, the story, the love, was a forgery. I had not just been lied to. I had been the victim of a meticulously constructed, professional-grade fraud. The $40,000 was gone. My dignity was in tatters. I felt a shame so profound, so complete, that it felt like I was drowning. I minimized the photo, and for the first time in my life, I typed a search query that was not for a scientific journal or a lesson plan. I typed, "How to unmask an online scammer." The hunt had begun. Part 2. My hidden power was not just a familiarity with the scientific method. It was a deep, ingrained belief in the power of empirical, verifiable evidence. For 40 years, I had stood in front of classrooms of skeptical teenagers and taught them how to approach the world. You start with a question. You form a hypothesis. You gather data. You test the hypothesis. You eliminate variables. You let the evidence, and only the evidence, lead you to the conclusion. My life had been turned upside down by a narrative, a story I wanted to believe. Now I was going to use the cold, hard, and unforgiving principles of science to dismantle it. My antagonist, this fictional Captain Evan MacArthur, was a master storyteller. He was a creature of pure narrative. His persona was a brilliant piece of psychological engineering, designed to target a specific vulnerability in women of my generation and background. The heroic soldier archetype is incredibly powerful. It taps into deep-seated values of patriotism, sacrifice, and honor. His loneliness, his grief for his late wife, his desperation to come home. It was all a script, a series of emotional triggers designed to bypass a victim's logical defenses and create a powerful, addictive chemical bond of sympathy and a desire to rescue. He was a social engineer of the highest caliber. He had profiled me perfectly. He saw retired teacher and widow, and knew that a story of noble, lonely sacrifice would be his key. He had no idea that a science teacher, a woman who had spent her life debunking myths and demanding proof, would eventually turn those same skills on him. I was utterly alone in this. My son lived in another state, and the shame of what had happened was a wall I could not breach. My friends were kind, but they wouldn't understand. They would just see me as a foolish, lonely old woman who had given her money away. I was an island of quiet, methodical fury. The internet, the very tool that had been used to deceive me, was now my laboratory. I was no longer a victim. I was a researcher, and I had just been presented with the most important and deeply personal research project of my life. To find the real man behind the fake hero, and to dissect his lies piece by painful piece. Part 3. My smart plan began with the central piece of fraudulent evidence, the photograph. The impossible shadows had been my wake-up call. But what else was hidden in that image? I began to apply the same forensic techniques I taught my advanced physics students. I downloaded the original image file from my email. The first thing I looked for was the EXIF data, the digital fingerprint embedded in every image file. As I expected, it had been scrubbed. The scammer was a professional. He knew enough to remove the most obvious clues, like the date, time, and GPS coordinates of the original photo. But scrubbing data is not the same as destroying it. The conflict was now a technical one. The obstacle was my own limited knowledge of advanced digital forensics. I spent the next 2 days in a self-directed crash course, devouring online tutorials and white papers from cybersecurity journals. I learned about steganography, the art of hiding information within an image. I learned about compression algorithms and how they can leave behind subtle, invisible artifacts, like a ghost of the original file. My quiet suburban home, with its comfortable armchairs and shelves of poetry, was transformed into a digital forensics lab. I downloaded a suite of open-source forensic software. The learning curve was steep, but my scientific mind was made for this. I began to analyze the photo's compression levels. And then I found it. A tiny anomaly. The main image was compressed at one level, but a small, almost invisible patch of pixels in the corner, where the helicopter was, showed a different compression signature. It was proof of digital alteration. The helicopter had been added later. It was a clumsy cut-and-paste job, but one that was invisible to the naked eye. The beautiful, dramatic photo of the hero being extracted from a war zone was a cheap, digital lie. This was my first piece of hard, empirical evidence. It was not a feeling, it was a fact. And it felt like the first solid ground I had stood on in months. The plan was no longer just about feeling better. It was about building a case, a scientific case, piece by irrefutable piece. Part 4. The ticking clock of my investigation was the scammer's own patience. I had to keep him on the hook, to make him believe I was still his loving, devoted, and slightly incompetent victim, still trying to get his final payment sent. I crafted my emails with the care of a scientist calibrating an experiment. My dearest Evan, I wrote, I am so terribly sorry. The bank has flagged my account for unusual activity because of the international transfers. They have frozen everything. I am going in to talk to them in person tomorrow. I feel so foolish, so helpless. Please don't be angry. The email was a performance, designed to buy me time, and to reinforce his perception of me as a financially naive woman who was in over her head. The subplot that would change everything began on a late-night trawl through a series of obscure online forums dedicated to exposing romance scammers. I had found my people. It was a small, anonymous, but fiercely intelligent community of digital vigilantes, a mix of other victims, retired law enforcement, and tech-savvy hobbyists. I didn't post my own story at first. I just lurked, I read, I learned. They called themselves the Unseen Army. The complexity of my situation was that I was still trying to do this alone. I was proud, and I was ashamed. But one night, I saw a post from a user named eagleeye_72. He had posted a detailed, brilliant analysis of a scammer's tactics that was so similar to my own experience it made my blood run cold. He was talking about the same scripts, the same psychological triggers. I took a leap of faith. I sent him a private, encrypted message. I told him my story. I sent him my analysis of the faked helicopter photo. The response came back in minutes. "Welcome, Sarah. We've been waiting for someone with your skills. Your captain is not a new player. We know him. And you just gave us the first piece of hard forensic evidence we've ever had against him. Now let's go get him." Part 5. The moment I connected with eagleeye_72 and the Unseen Army was the moment my lonely, grief-stricken quest for answers transformed into a coordinated, strategic military campaign. The turning point was not a single event, but a rapid-fire series of revelations that unfolded over the next 72 hours. eagleeye_72, who I would later learn was a retired signals intelligence analyst for the NSA, was a master of a technique he called digital triangulation. He wasn't interested in the content of the scammer's lies, but in the infrastructure behind them. "The words are the camouflage," he wrote to me in a secure chat. "The real animal is the code underneath." He and his team took my evidence, the emails, the photos, the wire transfer information, and began to cross-reference it with a massive database of known scammer profiles they had been building for years. They found him almost instantly. Captain Evan MacArthur was just one of at least a dozen different aliases he was currently using. He was also Dr. Ben Carter, an orthopedic surgeon in Syria. He was Thomas Grover, an art dealer in Paris. He was a whole cast of fictional, heroic men, all designed to appeal to a specific demographic of intelligent, professional, and lonely women. My shame began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, clinical anger. I was not a unique fool. I was just one victim in a massive, industrial-scale operation. The true, world-shattering turning point came from the one piece of evidence that was uniquely mine: the faked helicopter photograph. While the other members of the Unseen Army worked on the financial trails, a digital artist in their group, a woman who specialized in CGI for movies, took on the photo as a personal project. She didn't just confirm it was a fake, she deconstructed it. She was able to isolate the two source images. The background, the mountains, and the desert landscape were from a stock photo taken in the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, here in California. But the helicopter was the key. It was a unique, custom-painted medevac helicopter. By analyzing the tail number, which was barely visible but digitally recoverable, she traced it. It belonged to a single, specific private air charter company. A company based not in Afghanistan, but in San Diego. He wasn't in Yemen or Syria or Paris. He was here. He was in my state, just a few hours' drive away. The knowledge was a physical jolt, a surge of adrenaline that was equal parts terror and a fierce, predatory excitement. The global phantom was now a local problem. The ghost in the machine now had a physical, geographical location. I looked at the map on my screen. A red pin now marking the air charter company in San Diego. The vengeance was no longer a digital fantasy. It was a road trip. Part 6. The immediate consequence of placing the scammer in Southern California was that the entire investigation hyper-accelerated. The Unseen Army went into overdrive. They began to focus their entire digital search apparatus on the San Diego area. They scoured social media, public records, and data broker websites, looking for a man who fit the general demographic profile and had a digital footprint that intersected with the new evidence. The repercussion for the scammer, though he was still blissfully unaware, was that his world had just shrunk from the entire globe to a single, searchable city. His greatest weapon, his anonymity, had been shattered. My role in this new phase shifted. I was no longer just the key witness. I was becoming the field agent. I continued my performance as the loving, slightly incompetent victim, feeding Evan a steady stream of lies about my struggles with the bank, all while feeding his replies to the unseen army. But now my lies had a new, sharper edge. I began to subtly guide the conversation. "Oh, Evan," I wrote one evening, a stroke of inspired, vicious genius. "My son is flying into San Diego for a conference next week. I was thinking of driving down to see him. It's so beautiful there this time of year, isn't it? It makes me think of you." I was not just talking to him anymore. I was probing, testing his reactions, seeing if the mention of the city would elicit any specific response. He didn't take the bait, not directly. But his reply had a new, almost imperceptible undertone of anxiety. "San Diego is a big place, my love. Be careful." He was nervous. We were close. The predator was beginning to sense that he was no longer the only one hunting. Part 7. My growth during this period was in my transformation from a passive victim into an active, strategic hunter. The challenge was to manage my own very real fear. He was not a phantom in Nigeria anymore. He was a man who lived just a few hours away from me. The idea of a physical confrontation, of a real-world resolution, was terrifying. But my training as a science teacher kicked in. Fear was a chemical reaction, an emotional variable that had to be controlled. The best way to control it was with data, with a plan. My transformation was cemented in my decision to create a field kit. I began to assemble a new binder, my lab notebook, as I called it. But this was not just a collection of digital evidence. This was a tactical plan. I printed out satellite maps of the area around the San Diego Air Charter Company. I profiled the local businesses. I created a list of potential observation points. I was no longer just a researcher. I was an intelligence analyst preparing for a field operation. I overcame my fear by immersing myself in the cold, hard logic of the problem. I was not thinking about the man who had broken my heart. I was thinking about the target. I was objectifying him, turning him into a scientific problem to be solved. And in doing so, I was reclaiming my own power, my own sense of self. The woman who had been too ashamed to tell her own son about her victimhood was now preparing to drive into the heart of enemy territory. My V-Day, or Vengeance Day, as I had started to call it, was no longer a distant hope. It was a scheduled event, and I was the one planning it. Part 8. The final piece of the puzzle came from EagleEye_72. Using the name of the air charter company, he had managed to access, through a series of legally gray maneuvers I did not ask him to explain, their flight manifest records for the past year. He found what he was looking for. A series of private charter flights, paid for by a single corporate credit card. The flights were short, usually just an hour, and they always followed the same pattern. A quick trip out over the ocean and back. They were not for transport. They were for show. They were for taking photographs. The corporate card was in the name of a company called Global Asset Holdings, a company that was registered to a small, unassuming house in a suburban neighborhood of Carlsbad, just north of San Diego. This was it. The final address. The home base. The place where the fake soldier, the fake doctor, and the fake art dealer were all born. My preparation for the climax was now complete. I had the who, the where, and the how. Now I needed the when. I sent one last, fateful email to Evan. "My dearest," I wrote, "my son's conference was moved up. I am driving down to San Diego tomorrow. I know we can't meet, but I feel closer to you just being in the same city. Perhaps I will just park by the ocean and dream of the day you come home." I had given him my location and my timing. And I knew, with the certainty of a predator who knows its prey, that his arrogance, his need for control, would be too great. He would not be able to resist the urge to see his victim, to observe her from a safe distance, to savor his power. I was not just setting a trap. I was sending a formal, engraved invitation. And the guest of honor had no idea that the party was being held for his own destruction. Part 9. The morning of my trip to San Diego, I was not a woman going to meet her fate. I was a scientist going to observe the final phase of her experiment. I parked my car at a scenic overlook in Del Mar, a spot with a clear, panoramic view of the coastline, a place where a lonely woman might plausibly sit and watch the waves. But my perch was carefully chosen. It also had a clear, unobstructed view of the single road leading into the parking area. I had a pair of high-powered, bird-watching binoculars on the seat beside me. In my ear, I wore a small, nearly invisible Bluetooth earpiece, connected to an open line with EagleEye_72 and his team. "We're live, Sarah," his voice crackled, a calm, reassuring presence. "We have a satellite view of your location. We'll see him before he sees you." I sat for 2 hours. I watched the waves. I watched the tourists. I felt a strange, almost out-of-body calm. The woman who had been so consumed by a fictional love story was now the calm, patient center of a real-life surveillance operation. The climax was not going to be an explosion. It was going to be a quiet, positive identification. At 11:15 a.m., a late-model, black BMW sedan pulled into the far end of the parking lot. It didn't park in a normal spot. It pulled into a red zone, a place with a clear view of my car, but far enough away to seem casual. "We have a vehicle," Eagle Eye's voice said in my ear. "Black BMW, license plate starts with an 89er. Running it now." A man got out of the car. He was in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a soft, fleshy look that was a world away from the rugged, heroic Captain MacArthur. He was holding a phone to his ear, pretending to be on a call, but his eyes were locked on my car. "The plates are registered to a Scott Brandel," Eagle Eye's voice buzzed. "Address in Carlsbad. Got a match on his driver's license photo. That's our man, Sarah. That's the one." My heart hammered in my chest. It was him. The real him. The pathetic, ordinary man who had caused so much pain. He stood there for a full 10 minutes, watching me, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He was savoring it. He was enjoying the sight of his lonely widow, pining for him, exactly where he had told her he would be in his stories. It was the height of his narcissistic power. I did not get out of the car. I did not confront him. My part of the plan was over. I simply started my car and drove away, leaving him standing there. My vengeance was not in a shout. It was in the quiet, devastating knowledge of what was about to happen next. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I made a call. Not to the police, not yet. I called the one number the unseen army had dug up that was the key to his real, pathetic life. His wife's cell phone. "Hello," a woman's voice answered. "Is this Mrs. Brandel?" I asked, my voice calm and professional. "My name is Sarah Miller. I believe your husband has something of mine. And I have something I think you'll want to see." Part 10. The fallout was a quiet, domestic implosion. I met with his wife, a tired-looking woman who had clearly been ignoring the signs of her husband's unexplained income for years. I didn't show her the romantic emails. I just showed her the bank statements. The $40,000 that had left my account. And the evidence that her husband was not a day trader, as he had claimed, but a professional predator. The evidence was irrefutable. She was devastated, but she was also a pragmatist. She was the primary name on their mortgage. Faced with the choice between her fraudulent husband and her own financial survival, she chose survival. The long-term consequence for Scott Brandel was not a prison sentence, not at first. It was a swift and brutal divorce that left him with nothing. His wife, armed with the evidence of his criminal activity, took the house, the cars, and what was left of the money. And then she, in an act of her own self-preservation, turned the entire file I had given her over to the local police. He was arrested, not for his global scam operation, which was too complex for a local DA to prosecute, but for the simple, straightforward, and easily provable crime of felony theft against me. The emotional resolution for me was in the quiet, satisfying click of the legal system finally taking over. My work was done. A portion of my money was returned as part of his criminal restitution. But I had gotten something far more valuable back. I had gotten myself back. The curious, analytical, and relentlessly competent woman I had been before my grief had clouded my judgment. A year later, my quiet retirement was over. I had become one of the most respected administrators in the unseen army community. I wasn't a vigilante. I was a teacher again. I spent my days on the forums, not hunting for new scammers, but teaching other victims how to do what I had done. How to use the scientific method to find the facts. How to build a case. How to transform their shame into a weapon. I had taken the worst experience of my life and turned it into my new curriculum. The greatest weapon a con artist has is your shame. They count on your silence. This story is a testament to the power of bringing a secret into the light. It's a reminder that the same skills you have used your entire life, your professional expertise, your hobbies, your passions, can be your greatest defense. You are not a victim. You are a researcher. You are a hunter. If you or someone you know has been targeted, do not be silent. Report it. Talk about it. If this story of a woman who turned her pain into a powerful, evidence-based pursuit of justice inspired you, please like and subscribe.